What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? What do you think about gun control? Do you support it?
Whew. That's a loaded question, my friend.
Well, if you do, you're a racist, right?
Historically, that would be the case. Yes.
We are obviously going to dive into a very hot button topic today.
For some people, it's very, very hot.
Yes.
And some people could not care less.
This is true. This is very true.
But there is a consensus among most Americans that something needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. I would agree that something does need to be done. I'm not sure that gun control is the answer, and I want to expand this over gun control to say, does our approach to gun control make sense? Is it solving the problems that we want to solve? And this is one that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and this is really hard to compact into a TikTok video. I haven't really tackled it much with that. Not that it can't be done. I've done a lot, but it's also something that I think without a lot of explanation, a lot of people don't understand where my perspective comes from on this.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of room for nuance to be had.
And I don't feel like this topic gets a lot of nuance.
No, I would agree. People are either screaming Second Amendment or, they're on the opposite side of the barrel, so to say.
Dudunts.
Which is not a great joke, but it's the reality of the situation. Is usually there is two sides.
No, and that's it. I feel, I often compare this one to abortion rights, just because it gets a lot of emotionally charged responses, and a lot of the people who are very adamantly, in favor of just blanket, more restrictive gun control measures are coming to it from the same sort of emotional response as we need to save the children,
Yeah.
And it really is, though, they
well, I mean, rightfully so to a certain extent.
Yeah, but I mean, statistically, not really.
Statistically, yeah, you're right. I mean, mass shootings are like a very, very, very small percentage. Obviously, I think beyond the physical violence is the like mental effects of being put in a situation like that, and like having to do these type of drills. Like, I don't know.
But then there's the question: are the drills doing more harm
or
good?
That's my point. Is that like they're doing them? So like, how does that affect kids?
Right.
And
maybe that's something we can get into here. I didn't outline that in here.
Yeah, I didn't either. I think I tried to focus a lot of my research on like what laws have we passed in the past, why were they passed, and like what are the actual like laws and the outcomes of those laws that could potentially happen.
Well, I think we should just jump into it. I know that a lot of people who have strong opinions on this topic, and I think I come from a unique position where obviously I tend to be much more progressive. And I'm always of the progressive of you go far enough left, you get your guns back. Right. Karl Marx, under no pretext.
Bolsheviks really went for that armed rebellion, armed resistance for sure. And I have a somewhat unique perspective as well. I'm certainly not alone, but there's not that many like progressive veterans out there that would be more in favor of not having guns if it was like, if you could say like, yep, this is going to reduce the violence.
Right. And I would be in the same thing. I don't believe at this point that a more or less armed populace is an answer to anything. I don't think that I don't think in either.
The statistics show the more guns we have, the more people die.
Okay, yeah, and we will get into those statistics here.
But let's take blast to the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get on the Magic School Bus and go all the way back
to the future.
Yes, we're gonna do all the things that look at the 17th century, which is kind of when we were sort of around as a colony.
Yep.
Obviously, I've seen conflicting evidence to the 1620 or 1680s, but basically the southern colonies in the 1600s were very against black people having any guns
Mm-hmm.
because they were, slaves. They also
Yeah, usually arming the slaves is not the route you want to go if you're trying to keep slaves.
They really want to prevent insurrections
Yep.
by slaves. So yeah, they couldn't have any weapons actually, like staffs. Like they had a whole list of like melee weapons, you could say, that slaves weren't allowed to have, which makes sense. And then you really don't have much in the 1700s. It seems that pretty much status quo. Obviously, there's no like social change that happens.
There is an argument I've heard, and a lot of this stuff when you get back into constitutional intentions of the founding fathers.
Oh boy.
So take all of this with a grain of salt. But some very anti-Second Amendment people tend to subscribe to this school of thought, and there is some evidence to support it, that the Second Amendment was written to appease Southern slaveholders because they felt that they needed the right to maintain arms to keep their slave populations in control.
Yeah, and obviously when researching this topic, the Second Amendment is pretty well parsed through, and obviously there's amendments and legislation that sort of like upholds and adds context to the Second Amendment throughout history and leading up to today. And part of that is some people will say that basically up until the Heller case in the 2000s, the Second Amendment didn't ever really even directly apply to individuals having weapons in their own homes.
No.
In that the well-rounded militia was supposed to be for the state militia, not a like non-state run militia.
And I've always not been able to get on board with that interpretation just because it says
Well, do we have the Second Amendment up right here? We can just read it like verbatim, right?
Yeah.
Like let's get it on the record.
I have it pretty much memorized, but so here it is. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And so this is where I always like the militia part. I feel like is almost irrelevant because it says the right of the people, not the right of the militia, not the right of the state, but the right of the people. Now, I'm not a constitutional scholar, so I could be going off.
We're definitely not.
But and the way I always interpret it being written this way is coming from a quote unquote tyrannical government that we were fighting against. It's pretty easy for a centralized government if they have control, if the state has control of the weapons, to not allow the people to have the weapons. And if you were trying to overthrow the tyrannical government, which is what we quote unquote had just done, having a decentralized, so the people, the militia members, the people of the state being armed, having ammunition and arms to bring to the militia movement would ensure that the state couldn't control that. That's how I've always interpreted it, why it's wrote that way.
I think that's trying to like bring in the historical context of like why America, like or how America began like its independence. I feel like that's a lot of context to bring into one sentence. And I don't think that people look at this the security of a free state enough. Because does a free state, does that sound like your home? Or does that sound like the free state of a government? Or like a particular state or a particular local locality?
Who would you be maintaining freedom from? You'd be maintaining freedom from the state, right? So if the state got tyrannical, got authoritarian, you would be looking at the context of why was this written in the first place if it wasn't specifically for the slave thing, which they didn't write it that way. So looking at the way it's written, if it was, we just liberated ourselves, so to speak, from a tyrannical state, that a lot of these constitutional amendments were to make sure that we would maintain that autonomy, that we just liberated ourselves from. And that's the way I've always looked. Like I said, I'm not a constitutional scholar.
I mean, we also did a lot of the same shit that
absolutely.
Like England was doing to us before we liberated ourselves.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Like, I hear what you're saying.
I put a lot of the things I just said in air quotes.
Right.
If you can't see this because you're not watching us on YouTube, but
it's like, doing one thing and saying another. It's like, well, like, do you really want to do that? Or like, you just want to put it out there for lip service?
That's a lot of what our Constitution does, though. I mean, you look at the Electoral College, like, hey, we're a democracy, but not really. Because, like, if we decide that the people are too stupid to make their own decisions, we want to make sure that we've got the power to make those decisions for them.
Right.
Like, we have a lot of that in the Constitution.
Every person, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, except for black people, except for women,
except for people who don't own property,
except for poor people.
Yeah.
So like there's a lot that's contradictory in what we did versus what's written down in the words.
Absolutely, and obviously, these couple or this one sentence in the Constitution has
Bill of Rights
has been, in the Bill of Rights has been scrutinized excessively by many people, and there is lots of different interpretations
and
to
we're
it.
not going to make anything.
We are not going to
unique
solve that
or,
today. So that is just my perspective on it.
Obviously, we're just two people that generally align, and here we are, not agreeing on all
absolutely
a certain part of it.
And there's nothing saying either one of us is right or wrong. No, both of us could be totally off base. We have no idea.
There's a good chance of that. Actually.
Yeah, I'm fully accepting of that. So, and I'm not here saying the Second Amendment is absolute by any means. I was just saying my interpretation of the way it's written and how I've seen it.
Sure.
But anyway, you can continue with history.
So there's not a lot that happens in the 1700s. It seems, other than just basically saying, white people, they actually like mandated people to have weapons on like community meetings and stuff, and sit in town hall meetings, whatever. So like
they used to go very Oprah with guns. You get a gun and you get a gun. Everybody gets AK-47s.
All the white males get a gun. Yes, that was definitely a thing in the 1700s. Certainly carried forth into the 1800s to a certain extent. Pretty much up until the Civil War.
Can I ask, with your interpretation of the Second Amendment, with that, when there are clearly still some of the Founding Fathers alive to address this, if they were sort of mandating people to have guns, do you still feel like it was the state or the individual?
Well, I mean, I guess I would say that they thought of militia differently, and that when you say a well-regulated militia, militias are generally derived from a local governmental body that's creating a militia. And so by that on its own right, I feel like is sort of excluding individuals on its face of it right there. Yeah. And then when you bring in that second phrase, part of it, in the security of a free state, I feel like it, again, it's not describing an individual's need to necessarily defend themselves,
but mandating that all of these individuals maintained access and control of a firearm during these times would suggest that they wanted the individuals to hang on to them, in my perception, at a time much closer to the Constitution
in a militia.
Yeah. Was everybody just automatically enrolled in the militia? Was it like?
I mean, back then, I don't know. I'm not a historian.
Yeah, no, and I don't know. It was, again, just more food for thought on this, because this is obviously, it's always the well-regulated militia part and the shall not be infringed part are the two sides that everybody focuses on in that amendment.
Shall not be infringed. That's just like it's like, why even put that in there? It's like, oh, do we want any of these Bill of Rights amendments to be infringed? I don't think so. So I feel like that's superfluous.
All right, I'll be done beating this one to death.
Yeah. No, I specifically didn't do all the constitutional research because I
don't think that there's an answer in the constitutional research on this one.
Right, I'm not going to change anybody's mind, and if you pay attention to it at all, you probably have an opinion, and I don't really care to debate the semantics at this point.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to debate the semantics. Like I said, I don't really care about the amendment at all. It's just I get so sick of everybody getting hung up on the first couple words and the last couple words of that amendment and not looking at it as a whole piece.
Right. Or I appreciate what you did with taking it in historical context and like that. I think it's good to do. But it shouldn't be what derives policy today.
No, absolutely not. I agree with that too.
But yes, back to the 18th century. We're moving on slowly but surely. 19th century. 1857. Dred Scott, you might have heard of him. Basically was suing the U.S. and the Supreme Court heard the case. Basically, he was suing them and saying like, "Hey, I'm a person, and I'm a free person, so I should be a citizen, right?" And the Supreme Court, specifically Justice Taney, I don't remember his first name, whatever, but he put it out there that, and they dissented. They did not agree with Dred Scott, and they said that black people shouldn't be considered citizens because then they would have the right to bear arms. That's that's paraphrased, but that's essentially, they didn't want to give full rights to black people because that included their right to bear arms and, possibly fight against their oppressors. Yeah. Which happened just a few years later, actually. So,
so can we just say Dred Scott's a badass name?
Yeah, no, for sure. Isn't there like a pirate Dred Scott too, like a pirate in some?
There's a Dread Pirate. Dread Pirate. It's in Princess Bride.
Yeah.
Dread Pirate something. Yeah, I don't remember.
It's a great movie, but
good movie.
Good name too.
As you wish.
Yep, that's a thing.
Back to it.
So then, post Civil War, Reconstruction era, is where things, as they usually do in our history, start to get spicy. Dicey and spicy. You start to see some black codes, which are not exclusively, they're just anything that was created specifically to keep rights away from black people, of which there was a lot that was thought up. A lot of
loitering.
Just think of all.
Don't stand in one place too long, or you can go to jail.
Right.
Vagrancy, homelessness.
Think of like all the brain power that was used to create like racist shit. It was used to like do anything else, and just think how much better off we would be.
We'd have flying cars by now, people, if you didn't spend so much goddamn time trying to figure out how to keep black people from standing too long on the sidewalk.
Right. Or yeah, exactly. But anyway, so there's a lot of stuff that's going on. You got Republicans that are pro-Reconstruction trying to pass laws that reduce and limit the ability for all people to publicly carry weapons, basically in an effort to hopefully reduce public gun violence and just massive like mob violence and intimidation of black people, new governmental agencies, businesses. I think that's kind of the beginning of where you start to analyze neutral laws, and it's like, well, is it neutral on the face of it? And this one kind of seems like it is. It applies to black people and white people, but like, what are the sort of the ramifications of those type of laws, and like, what are the downstream effects that really happen? Like, are black people much worse off, or were they worse off because of that law? Just due to the enforcement not being there for white people. If they're
and the fact that a lot of the white people were grandfathered into a lot of these things,
right? Yeah, so
they
it's
already had the weapons.
Is it neutral, or is it like, yeah, this really didn't help? In a real sense.
Who was the more vulnerable people who, in theory, needed
guns to protect themselves, right?
In this situation, and in every situation, it's usually minorities, right? So,
at least in our country in the past. But then you have some more overt stuff. Obviously, in Tennessee, they make a law where the only legal handguns are a specific like brand and make and model that are just so happen to be some of the more expensive and bigger ones, and so it's they make it illegal to own small, cheaper handguns, and like those little musket type weapons that that you can wear on your waist a little bit easier.
You couldn't be running around with your Derringer over under.
Yeah, Derringer specifically, that brand was not legal in Tennessee for a time because it was cheaper and more accessible to black people and poor people.
Yep.
Then you have, we're kind of moving along here into like 1911, where New York implements the Sullivan Act, and basically it forces gun licenses on citizens and basically puts the determination of whether you can have a gun into the hands of, the police who,
Again,
you should always trust them, right? They have no bias in the historical, aspects of our
police
country.
weren't created as slave catchers or anything.
I don't think that shouldn't have been a problem, right? None of those practices, none of those traditions would carry on.
They obviously know that black people are more dangerous with guns, so why would they give it to them? They're common sense.
Common sense, yeah. It's something. And then now we're rolling into the 20th century. In 1934, 1938, we get some national firearm acts that basically put heavy taxes and regulations on machine guns, sawed-off shotguns, silencers, prohibited felons from owning weapons, required gun owners to register with the federal government. So some kind of the really foundations of modern gun regulation. I don't think that any of that specifically, other than I don't think it's overtly racist by any means. I think the only way that you can make the argument, I think this is the argument that you could make for a lot of the regulation that we're even proposing now, is that it doesn't outright outlaw automatic weapons. It doesn't outright outlaw silencers or short-barreled rifles. It just makes it more time-consuming to get those, and it makes it cost more money. Yep. So those are two things that poor people generally don't have a lot of. So
also, felons. Who's more likely to have a criminal history for the same crimes?
Yes, that's an exact way to disenfranchise voters as well as gun owners.
And with the NFA was some of the dumbest gun control legislation ever. It really was.
You have an opinion on. I don't really have a strong opinion on any of the
so for example, short-barreled rifles and sawed-off shotguns. Now, the logic behind this at the time, was that the original text of the bill banned handguns, and this bill was designed to address gangland era, mobster era crime,
which is why it is partially supported by the NRA.
So this was, the Al Capones of the world. They were trying to rein in that because it was the Wild West back at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the original text of the bill outlawed handguns, and they outlawed handguns because of the concealability of handguns
and sawed-off shotguns.
So that's where sawed-off shotguns and short-barrel rifle law came in. But then the handgun part got taken out because it was too extreme. They're like, everybody owns a handgun. It's not something you can expect everybody to give up. To get this passed, they pulled out the handgun portion and left the sawed-off shotgun and the short-barreled rifle portion. So the whole purpose, so this was just to close a loophole that never ended up existing because the pistols weren't ever banned in the first place. But now, today, if you and with a lot of modern weapons are modular, and you can, people do this for sporting, for hunting. They put together their own guns.
Yeah, the AR platform is highly customizable.
Yep. And you can accidentally make yourself a felon or commit a felony by how you put together a gun, because if you go under a certain length,
that part it's hard to do on your own, but
it's really not.
You're gonna saw off part of your barrel on a rifle.
No, because you can buy a 14. So the length is 16 and a half inches, right? That's the cutoff.
Yep.
But it doesn't apply to pistols, right? So you can build an AR pistol. So you can get a 14-inch barrel, and then they have things called forearm braces.
Yeah.
Which looks like a stock and can function like a stock, but it's not a stock. And they've got very specific, like the ATF, who has nothing better to do with their time than make up stupid laws.
Yeah, they got a lot on their plate, but they really focus. I don't know how much time. Like they talk about it a lot, and it gets a lot of press. I don't know how much of the resources are actually tied up in making these type of regulations. I would guess it's a pretty small percentage.
It probably is, but there again, any resources tied up in these kind of regulations ends up being kind of stupid because what difference are you solving if you have so now you put a 14-inch barrel on a gun and a regular stock or something that doesn't qualify as a forearm brace, now suddenly you're committing a felony.
Yeah.
You change the gun slightly, and it's perfectly legal as a pistol. And it's these kinds of things that there's no logical reason for one or the other. There's no logical reason for these to be weapons. Yeah. These are the things that a lot of times people who are gun enthusiasts get so frustrated. Like, why am I going to allow you guys to come up with more gun laws when this is the dumb shit you already have on? The silencer one, for example, too, that was put into place because if you've ever been around... Because
mobs were using silencers.
No, had nothing to do with the mafia.
Okay.
Silencers do not silence a gun. They bring the decibel down from, hearing...
Yeah, was it like 150 or like 180 to like 130 or something?
Right. It's
that?
like it reduces hearing damage is basically what it gets it down to.
You really shouldn't be using them as your only hearing protection. No,
you shouldn't be. But it does allow you to shoot in slightly more populated areas without being as disturbing.
Well, it certainly has been used effectively to thwart law enforcement in a particular mass shooting.
Which one are you referring to?
I want to say it's in like Virginia. This guy had like a rifle with a silencer on it, and it enabled him to just continue to shoot for longer because the police couldn't identify where he was, and there were people who didn't even like really notice like 100 yards away. Because the sound kind of dissipates a little bit.
Yeah, I mean it quiets it some.
Right,
and does not make it quiet.
No, it doesn't make it like. Quiet, but it could make it so where if you're just like walking or you got like iPod in and you're not really paying attention, or cars make noises that sound anything, whatever, and you're in the street and there are people just walking, minding their own business, not even noticing that less than a quarter mile away there were people getting knocked off.
Sure. Okay. And fair enough. The reason they put the that provision in is because it was during the recession. And they thought that people were going to use it to do illegal poaching to feed themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Why give the people the opportunity to hunt for food?
Yep. That is the reason that the suppressor stamp is in the.
I'm sure that's correct. I'm sure that's accurate.
So anyway, and so when I get back to the fact that a lot of these are ridiculous laws, ridiculous things. That don't really do a whole lot to actually address anything, and this definitely gives justification to people who are like, why would I support any new gun legislation when there will be no give, there's no give and take. It's always wanting to go one direction. Let's add more on top of this without taking away some of the things that would make people who enjoy firearms or firearm enthusiasts their lives easier and more affordable. Because I'm sure if they came to the table and were like, hey, we want to add this extension to background checks, but we will give you, national reciprocity for your conceal and carry permits and get rid of short barrel rifle and suppressor stamps, would you be willing to do that? I think a lot more people would be on board. But
sure, I can understand where you're coming from with that. And I was just trying to think of like an analogy or a metaphor to where a government does something stupid for a long time and then doesn't do stupid stuff.
Yeah, right? No,
I hear what you're saying in that why give power to somebody that's kind of like made shit murky and difficult to work through, and why give them the ability to better that. I hear what you're saying. I don't think that's a valid point necessarily. Like obviously there's a lot of politicians who don't understand what a lot of the stuff you're talking about is, and I think they should be very much chastised for not understanding. There's plenty of gun stuff that is like just people call things different things, and like the actual verbiage terminology I feel like people get way too
Oh,
caught up, and
fu-
it's like, oh, you called it
definitely.
an assault rifle, but it's an Armalite, or Colt Armalite, or
Yeah.
like, I don't care.
No, I
In
totally agree on some of the verbiage. They get way too carried away on that side of the issue. Because the gun nuts are fucking awful. Don't get me wrong. They are fucking awful.
I mean, it's cool. Like the guns are cool. I think it's fun and it's cool, but like you're going a little bit too far.
Yep, absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all. But that's kind of the issue, I think, is you get people who have no idea about the laws that are already in place and how they apply in reality to people, and then you got people who are obsessed with it and make it their entire goddamn personality and want you to be, know every technicality about everything, and it's like.
Yeah.
There's a middle ground here of some people need to understand a little bit more before they try passing legislation, and some people need to just shut the fuck up. They used to build them. They used to market them as assault rifles. That's where the term came from. It came from the gun companies. Now they're walking it back because it's a bad term.
Right. It all is based off of military, research and military based models. So like,
To be fair,
you want.
pretty much all guns are though.
No, I'm not disagreeing that. It's just like it's all made for like killing in some way, shape, or form. And so I don't.
Yeah,
like
no,
I
the
said, I don't-
technicality stuff, I'm 100% on board. They just need to shut the hell up.
Like
about.
I don't care if it's a clip or a magazine. Like,
Yep.
how many rounds does it hold? That's what you need to know. What is it specifically called in this specific type of weapon versus this specific type of weapon? Jesus Christ, people.
Yep. No, I agree with you there. Anyway, I keep derailing this.
No,
so.
it's okay. It's okay that there's all this stuff we can just skip past it later on. So we're just getting to it in a more natural manner. So, after 1934, 1938, there's not really much nationally that changes again until 1968. But right before then is the Mulford Act. In 1967, you have Ronald Reagan, the governor of California, famously banning open carry for everybody in what appears to be a pretty direct response to Black Panthers following the law by legally protesting with open carry.
Yep. And that it is, again, the only, I think, gun control our country's passed that wasn't overtly racist was the National Firearms Act of 1934. This clearly was, and I always think it's funny that gun people especially get on California for all their restrictive gun laws. And it's
Right.
like, who the fuck was in charge when these gun laws got put into place? Like, who passed them?
Right, and who supported them? Guess who also supported the Mulford Act? The NRA. And this is I only mention the NRA in this stuff because they have so much power today, and they have what appears to be a very hypocritical business model at this point, in that they were very much against or very much for regulation in basically pre-1970s, and are now touting them to be like the free gun, like pro gun like lobby. And it's like, yeah, well, also your financial structure and the way that company gets a lot of its money to do things also shifted from donations to donations from specific corporations that just so happen to manufacture guns. So I don't know.
No, absolutely. And I've always said, if the left really wanted to get gun control passed, like if that was their ultimate goal, just start arming minorities. Give all the trans people and the black people guns, and the NRA will come and ban every single one of them in a heartbeat.
I was looking at a study, and basically it showed that white people who have anti-black tendencies and just whatever they think like, oh, they're just lazy people, or like there's black culture that makes black people poor and live in crime-ridden areas. Those people have like very interesting views on gun control, in that when you told them about specific gun control measures, when you told them about specific groups of people using like their Second Amendment right to gain access to guns through legal means, they were less favorable towards those avenues to get weapons than people who were just flatly like not in favor of gun control or not in favor of guns. Like they were like, that doesn't matter. But to those type of people, white people who are anti-black. They were like, do you really want to allow people to get guns like that? I do you see them doing that? I don't know. That's kind of weird.
And the NRA is a perfect example of that. It's like everybody should own a gun except for those people. Maybe not every. We should rethink this.
But now they have a black spokesperson. What's his name? Colin Noir or whatever.
Their token black guy.
Right. I mean.
It's like a Candace Owens,
right?
You
exactly.
know,
you gotta have them now. So, like
Clarence Thomas, it's,
right? They just put so much propaganda out there, and they have like their own streaming service and shit like that. And I feel like it would be a disservice to the conversation if you didn't discuss their role.
Oh my God, absolutely.
In this at all.
And the NRA is absolutely trash, and like there's no question. Even just as an organization, as the way they run internally, there's no integrity. They've had a bunch of scandals, with the way that they misappropriate funds and the way that they have like been, sleeping with Russian spies and giving them information and stuff. There's just a lot. Like the NRA sucks as a whole, and they're a horrible propaganda machine that really does nothing to protect gun rights.
Well, and now they're not even like a marksman's club anymore. It's just like they're a lobbyist now. They're a lobbyist group now.
And it does make it difficult for people who are not in a cult, but also enjoy firearms to be involved, because like so many gun clubs and so many shooting ranges require you to be an NRA member to even be a member of the club. And it's like, I'm not fucking gonna be an NRA member.
Yeah, it's sort of force feeding you that propaganda. And like, if you want to do this thing, you have to believe this group's line of bullshit.
Well, and even like, because I've talked to people who own ranges, and part of it is the NRA gives so much money to these organizations. They're like, well, you got to make all your members a member, or we're not going to give you this money. So even if they aren't buying the bullshit or they're not on board with it, they're tied to that because the NRA has fiscally tied basically every gun organization.
So much power and so much money.
There are some other. There's the John Brown Gun Club though, and the Leftist Gun Club. There's a few out there that are.
Is that what it's called? The Leftist Gun Club?
I think it is, yeah.
Oh, that's it.
I actually think it is.
I don't know. That's cool. I didn't look into any of those. None of those had millions of views on YouTube.
No. Yeah, it's the Liberal Gun Club. Sorry,
The
Liberal Gun Club and the John Brown Gun Club.
Okay.
Which I mean, John Brown's the way to go.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. So that's the Mulford Act, California, Republican governor, Republican. Actually, it's pretty bipartisan.
Yeah, that was a bipartisan bill passed.
But one of the state
this
senators.
was also back in the '60s when a lot of Democrats were still not modern Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. Then we have the 1968 Gun Control Act signed by Nixon, a Republican, banned cheaply made handguns, colloquially called Saturday Night Specials, basically small revolvers and concealable handguns.
Clearly very biased towards a specific demographic again.
Right. We're looking basically back to like the Tennessee Army Navy laws that basically only legalized expensive weapons. Also supported by the NRA, by the way. And I just thought it was hilarious because I'm doing some research, watching. I got to watch the NRA stuff too.
Absolutely.
And they were talking about like gun control history, and they're like, it's crazy that these people that are poor, they have to work 2 jobs and they get paid in cash and they come home at 3 a.m. and the people in the neighborhood know they work in cash and they don't have the right to arm themselves. And it's like, yeah. That was the Republican Party supported by the NRA that did that. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, but they know that their constituents don't read, so
I know. It's just
it
hurts my brain. I started my day doing research, and I shouldn't have done it, but I started with the NRA stuff.
Yeah.
And it basically numbed my mind for like the next 4 hours. I just couldn't focus on anything else.
No, it's worth just skipping over. It is so bad. It is so bad. One you didn't have on here that I wanted to add because it's always Reagan.
Right.
1986, the Firearm Owners Protection Act, which sounds like,
That's very much anti-gun control. Keep your guns safe.
Right. You'd think it banned machine guns. Ronald Reagan banned fully automatic weapons.
I thought that was also done in 1934, 1938.
Nope. That just made them more expensive to get.
Oh, got
This
it.
banned the manufacture of new ones. So after 1934, 1936, to get one, you still had to go through the stamp process and everything. Now, you still have to go through all that stamp process, but you cannot manufacture a fully automatic weapon for sale to the public in the United States if it was made after 1986. So all the machine guns, all the automatic weapons in the country were produced before 1986. They are all insanely expensive because they're collector's items.
They're
now.
like over like $10,000 for like a single one.
Yeah, you can't. You just can't. Like, I mean, I would love I really want a Tommy gun.
Tommy gun would be cool.
I want a fucking Tommy
Cool.
gun.
Like a Thompson or something.
Yeah.
Like
but it's like I'm not going and spending 15, 20 grand on a gun just because I'm like it's cool and I want to have one.
Should I put a down payment down on a car or a house, or should I buy an automatic gun?
Yep.
I wonder what has the most utility there for you.
And also worth noting, because of that act, anybody who's like, I don't believe that people should have fully automatic weapons. We don't, and we haven't had them for a long time. Automatic weapons have not been accessible to the layman for 40 plus years, and were barely accessible before then. It was just they could still manufacture them.
Right.
It's just an expensive process to get them. But now you have to buy something that's literally an antique, a collector's item,
Right,
because they don't manufacture them anymore.
And I think you could still buy like automatic like MP5s and shit like that. Like I feel like I've seen plenty of those still around.
If they're before 1986, they make a lot of semi-automatic versions of. Like you can buy a reproduction semi-automatic Tommy gun, but who the fuck wants that?
No,
I don't want to pull the trigger every time.
Maybe I'm not as into the guns as I should be, but
no, I mean there's no reason, like, if it's not something that interests you, to be into it. It's just a point worth noting that there is a difference between, and this is a technical point that is important. There is a difference between automatic and semi-automatic.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think it's a technical point. I think it's very relevant to the larger discussion of gun violence.
And a lot of people, like, they assume, these assault rifles are automatic weapons, and that gets thrown around a lot. It's like not one of them.
It doesn't make them not dangerous. It just makes them a little bit less dangerous, for sure. And I think automatic weapons are cool, but I don't think that it's necessary to our public that they have that. And I think we would see a lot worse gun violence if automatic weapons were widely available.
No, I mean, but they were, right?
I don't know. Like, you hear about it from like mobsters using Tommy guns and stuff. Like, you don't really. Yeah. There wasn't. I don't think there was like the gun violence that we think of today. I don't think that was the gun violence of like the 30s
when they had automatic weapons.
Right.
I'm gonna goad you the whole way through.
This is why I was like hesitant to do this episode, because it's like you think something and you're like, I'm telling you, like, people didn't want to use weapons the same way, but you don't phrase it the exact perfect way, and then you can say shit like that, and you're like, oh, gotcha. Yeah. And I know you're doing it on like a somewhat joking manner.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also I think it's hard to say. We did not keep real good statistics on this stuff back then, so we can't say one way or the other.
Most of the gun violence that we do have statistics for showed that most was like white on white murder, like just one person or just like very
Which I have a ton of that statistics at the end of this. This will get really statistic heavy at the end because obviously I have some points to make. But I will let you
if we want to make those points.
Well, this might be one of the long ones here.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, that's basically it. There's not like obviously there's some like really minor like ATF regulations and minor things that get brought up like what's the brace, the automatic like brace
a bump stock.
bump stock, yeah, the bump stock stuff like
Banned by executive order by none other than Donald Trump, by the way, for all you pro-gun people out there.
Rightfully so. Should have been done by Obama if it was around when Obama was around.
It was around back then.
I mean, I don't think
it hadn't been used in a mass shooting at that point.
Right.
That's what got it banned.
Yeah.
But they'd been around for a long time, and they were considered like a gimmick, a toy.
Yeah.
And then one person used them. Yeah.
Until you're like, oh, just like guns in general, like used correctly or used in a nonviolent manner, recreationally, clearly, just fine.
Yep.
But misuse it and not so fine.
Ruin it for everybody. Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that is what it is. But
so that's pretty much it. Obviously, okay. Well, I guess I am skipping over the assault rifle ban.
Assault weapons ban,
Assault weapons
1994 to 2004,
Right.
and I will get into that heavy in the statistics
All right, well-
on the end. But we can. That was passed by Clinton
Right.
in 1994. Heavy support again from Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, huge support. He wrote him with Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter all wrote a letter to Congress and passed with bipartisan support.
Yep.
So this narrative that Democrats are taking away your guns
Yep,
is once again
Bullshit.
Bullshit.
But the assault weapons ban banned, the black scary guns. Anything with a pistol grip, I think it was. Anything it limited to a 10-round mag.
Grip and another particular like identifier of an assault rifle.
Yeah.
So it was like another thing where I can hear what you're saying. It was like it's very specifically weird and difficult to kind of like manage that. But that's the way it was.
Yep. A 10-round magazine. I think it
10-round
limited
magazine.
magazine limits. It had a bunch of those things. We also, at some point, I don't remember if it was with this, but we banned import of like AK-47s and like semi-automatic AK-47s and ammunition from Russia and stuff like that. Which the AK-47 was banned by the assault weapons ban just because it fit the identifiers anyway.
Right.
But anyway, so that was it. That was in place for 10 years, expired in 2004 under George Bush.
Sunset clause, basically just, I don't know. It was basically a test run then is what it came down to.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, Bush could have renewed it. He didn't for obvious reasons. But yeah, that was really the last real gun control legislation we've had.
Bush was in support of a larger and better upgraded background check system.
Yep. But not the AWB because they like selling those because they make a lot of money off of them. I mean, the AR is the most popular rifle in the country, popular firearm in the country.
Well,
period.
it's like any if they had a modular car, that would be popular too. It's like
exactly, and that's the point. Is like you can build this to do exactly what you want to do. You want to do target shooting like the shit Keanu Reeves does.
Yeah, it looks cool.
It does.
There's no doubt about it.
You can
and
build them.
The marketing around it is huge, and like obviously it's been popularized in media, movies, TV
absolutely.
shows.
Yeah, I mean,
so,
you definitely got the cool factor, and then people you don't need this for hunting, but a lot of people do use them for hunting, hog hunting, coyote hunting. They're incredibly popular.
Yeah.
You can build them to hunt any large or small game you want. They come in every single caliber imaginable, and so there's obviously a lot of appeal to that for people who are firearm enthusiasts or sportsman enthusiasts, and that's why it's the most popular platform in the country by a long shot.
Not the most popular for murdering people, though.
No, it's not, and we will get into that at the end.
Yes. So, I mean, the next part I have in here is I guess, like gun control and reform proposals and kind of post like 1990s, like what's been done and what's been possibly successful and what kind of stuff are we looking at here that could make a difference. I don't know if this is the right spot for it. We might want to move this kind of to the ends, but I feel like it's going to take up a lot of time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we can skip back and come back to that. Gun violence protection versus gun control. I'm going to be honest, I didn't even read this part of the section that you put in here.
That's okay.
So.
That's okay. Why bother reading anything I write anyway?
That was the most Minnesota passive-aggressive shit I've ever heard in my life.
So this is what I found this site, this group, this legislative proposal group called the Brady United Against Gun Violence. Basically, kind of, it was founded before the Brady Act.
Yep.
Well, obviously, but
Oh, and fun fact, wasn't Brady the Secret Service agent that got shot?
no, he was the like the secretary of something to Reagan during.
It had something to do with Reagan.
He's in Reagan's group, Reagan's cabinet, and he took one for the Ronald Reagan team, and basically ended up dying in that assassination attempt that almost killed Reagan.
Yeah, so that's what I was. So he wasn't a Secret Service agent, though.
I don't think he was Secret Service specifically.
Okay. Anyway,
but yeah, they have some really good stuff here about kind of what we're dealing with, sort of obstacles in the just sort of erosion of democracy and the enabling of lobbyists and lobby groups and the filibuster, and how it sort of disables our ability to do democracy.
Yeah.
And so I think that stuff is pretty universal. It doesn't specifically have anything to do with gun control, but that's one of
But there's heavy lobbying in the gun industry for sure.
Yeah, of course.
And obviously a big one to focus on.
It is a big deal. And like the filibustering specifically, like Republicans have gone on record saying like, I'll filibuster anything that would be considered gun control. So like, and obviously the filibusters.
Yep, absolutely.
We should have a whole conversation about the filibuster, but and it's basically based around like the Brady background check and the NICS system that's currently being used for background checks or instant background checks. And I don't really want to go into like super
that's
crazy
perfectly fine
stuff, but they have a couple like common sense, I guess you could say, like approaches to like things that could change. It kind of looking at two different approaches. They call it the demand and supply side approach of like gun violence. With the demand side being implementing and funding more community violence intervention and interruption programs, basically approaching violence reduction from public health perspective, obviously working to reduce violence and specifically gun violence. And they have been able to, through not specifically Brady, but just lots of programs around the country, a lot of major cities, they've been able to do a pretty decent job since when they started. A lot of them report basically anywhere from a 25 to 73% reductions in shootings and the killings that happen off of that. So like,
and these are just community programs where they're focusing on
like Baltimore, New York, Philadelphia,
and
Chicago.
what kind of things do they focus on?
The site didn't really go into a lot of their like the measurable tactics is what they call it. I assume it's mostly like community outreach and providing support for people that are put in high risk situations. They said that like if you witness a gun violence or like are part of it in any way, it like doubles the chance that you will commit or have gun violence committed on you.
I mean, I think that's just violence across the board. Like if you grow up in an abusive household, you're much more likely to be an abusive spouse or abusive parent. So yeah, I mean that makes total sense.
Yep. So like they're doing some good work on like the people side of things, right? Like what can we do to make people not want to hurt other people?
Hearts and minds,
a little bit.
But that's a great approach.
Anything that stops people from getting hurt and being like thrown into this cycle is like, obviously I don't think anybody's opposed to that. On the supply side of thing, I would suspect there's a little bit more pushback. One of the biggest things that they had was gun tracing, and I have this up here a little bit. Basically, creating like not just a serial number, but like a firearm title.
Yeah.
And so like when you transfer like a car over to somebody, you like you sign over the title to them, and so like you'd have that for guns and having more like identifiable like things. Like if you shoot a bullet, like it has like it marks the bullet with like something that you can positively identify to that weapon adds that.
I mean, I guess they do.
They have some of that now.
CSI Labs can do that.
Right, right. I think they want to make it more accountability and more like somehow it makes it a lot easier to do stuff where you don't need like high.
Yeah, you're gonna get a ton of pushback from that from the pro gun people.
Right. I personally I don't understand why it would matter if the bullet that you shoot can be traced back to your particular gun. I don't know why, if you're a law-abiding citizen, that affects you in any way.
Yeah. I'd say it comes more to the titling aspect of it.
Sure.
Is a lot of people who believe that they need or want this protection,
fight against tyranny
from the government. And government overreach is not something to put your nose up at. Let's be real. Again, using these going back to things like the MOVE bombing in Philadelphia and stuff. It's like, we know these people have guns.
True.
and you can use that as a justification to do a lot of sketchy shit as a government. Unfortunately, it sounds paranoid, and for a lot of people it very much is paranoia, but
yeah, I mean, if you're not a black person who's just trying to
well, then we can go back to Waco.
Well, that's pretty culty.
It's all culty. MOVE wasn't exactly the best people in the
that's
world
true.
either.
I agree. MOVE had they had some controversy and some stuff going on the back end too.
But the weapons was the reason that they handled those situations the way that they handled it, justified their actions. Same with Ruby Ridge. I mean, we've got a lot of history of these kinds of things where the government,
statistically, though,
yeah, sure, absolutely,
statistically, Jordan,
the
government doesn't do that sort of stuff very often.
Yeah,
I'm just throwing your
no, absolutely. I'm playing the devil's advocate from the where you're going to get the pushback with this.
Oh no, yeah.
That's where it's going to come from. The law-abiding citizen means that you're not questioning the government, and you're a sheeple.
I knew exactly where that was going, but if you don't shoot bad things with your gun, then the fact that the bullet can be traced to you,
I give zero fucks about it. The only issues that I have with it then go back to felons, especially nonviolent felons, not being allowed to own firearms because that's racially discriminatory, and this is one more obstacle for them to be able to obtain something, obviously illegally in those cases, but obtain something to protect themselves, because those are the people who are most at risk.
I think there's the way that we're rolling back some felony rights being taken away. We're rolling back the taking away of rights.
Right, yeah. Giving rights back to felons, yeah.
The way that we're handling some of that stuff today, I think is there's discussions to be had, and there's nuance to be had about which felons and what particular people should be given those rights back.
Absolutely.
Certainly. The other thing that they said was that according to their data, the latest available data that they could find, about 90% of guns that are used in crimes can be traced back to roughly 5% of gun dealers.
That seems like a really easy problem to solve.
Yeah, you'd think. They say that there's they don't really prosecute dealers all that well or that much or that harshly. And so either they are able to start up new dealerships, whatever. I don't know exactly, but that was their statistic they had on there. I thought that was, if accurate, what are we doing?
Yeah,
Fail?
it seems like finding 5%, that seems like a pretty easy number, a pretty manageable number to be
and they say
what's
that
going on?
It could be traced back. So it's like, where's the okay? It's traced back. Why not 100% conviction there?
Well, and that's the thing is, we already don't enforce a lot of the gun legislation we have in place, which again is an argument of how is more going to help if we can't tackle what we've got now. But this goes to that, as obviously a very small concentration of dealers are responsible for putting firearms in hands of the vast majority of criminals using guns,
right? Which is
seems like
incredibly tiny majority of people or minority people who actually own guns. So we're talking about a minority, a tiny minority selling to another tiny minority, committing another tiny minority of crimes. So
it should be easy to go back after this stuff without any new legislation. We should have everything we need in place to address these problems, and we're not doing that.
I agree. But I don't know why that part of the conversation isn't being had. And I even on this one site, they didn't really have a ton of information as to why. They did have a bunch of links back to ATF and FBI documents and like studies and stuff. And I was like, I'm not going to read a
Yeah, no.
80 page, like FBI
A report. Yeah,
report.
No,
But,
I totally
there's
understand.
probably
that.
some stuff in there that shows why
And,
it's difficult.
and there's a lot of protections. Like if they follow XYZ protocol, whether it's very clear that the person's a criminal or giving false information or something, if you can't prove that those people like knew or didn't know, then you can't necessarily prosecute them for that. I'm sure there's a lot of nuance there that we don't see, but it seems like it's a very narrow area to focus on addressing without that could have pretty massive impacts.
Sure.
In that sense, I would assume.
Well, let's take a look at the actual numbers then.
Yo.
Let's get into those, and then we can get into kind of the more solution based stuff that we're
Absolutely. So this is where obviously assault weapons bans always seems to be front and center when it comes to that. That's the sexy stuff. Let's
They're big and scary.
ban the black scary stuff, which is all this is about, right?
Got me there.
And so we did that with the assault weapons ban. We talked about a little bit before. The assault weapons ban went into effect under Clinton in 1994, expired under Bush in 2004, and violent crime rates as a whole peaked in 1992 and started trending down.
The whole just crime in general.
Yep, violent crime in general. And I think it's important to look at this as a whole, because if you just say gun crime, but the same number of people are affected by violent crime, whether you're shot or stabbed to death or whatever, like you're still dead. It doesn't really make that much difference to you. Like, it's addressing total violent crime should be our focus, right?
Yeah.
So violent crime rates peaked in 1992, 2 years before this went in, and started a downward trajectory that basically remained unchanged through not only that entire decade, but when it was expired, it continued to decrease at that same rate until 2014.
Right.
So it started going down before. The AR basically instantly became the most popular rifle in America in 2005. It was, everybody had one at that point.
Right. And a lot of the same statistics is like, it's kind of weird because you look at a place like Australia in like their mass shooting decade. They had a whole decade that was just like they had an exponential increase of mass shootings in that decade. But the previous decade, like it was like 2 or 3,
right?
And then the next
decade,
it was like 2 or 3. But like they did some major gun control measures at the end of like the decade, the 10-year period that had a huge spike in mass shootings, and it's like, well, so what's the anomaly here?
I had Australia's
the Port Arthur shooting here.
Yeah, so the Port Arthur one was the one that spurred their gun control measure, right?
Yeah.
And this is the United Kingdom. Fuck did it go? But then they really had no mass shootings of any significance on a regular basis. There's no statistical consistency. They had one that was 15 people killed, and then the Port Arthur one was huge,
right?
28 or something like that. Yeah. And then they passed their gun legislation, and then in the early 2000s, they had another mass shooting that killed 13 people, which would have been like their third largest mass shooting in modern history. But then you look, so you have two bookends outside of the gun control legislation that it was like 15 and 13, basically the same.
Right.
One big one that spurred the legislation, and then nothing on either end. It's, couple people. They're considering mass shootings like 2 or 3 people get shot.
It's 4+, not including the shooter, according to them.
Mm-hmm. So it's hard for me to say that there's any statistical evidence there to suggest that anything happened one way or the other.
I agree. They did look at, though, just like specific like gun violence, or I think it was specifically gun violence. It might have been just all violence, but I think it was specifically gun violence, and it was decreasing prior to when they did their law. What was it, in 94?
96.
96. So
96, and
it had already been decreasing for about 20 years, but at a rate of around 3% per year.
Yep.
After the gun legislation got passed in 96, that decrease increased further to 4.5% consistently. So people say,
well, so I have the numbers up here, and 1996, their violent crime rate, and maybe you said it might have just been gun crime.
it might have been. I don't recall
So
the
yeah,
specific.
I think gun crime's the dumbest statistic to use for anything, because again, if it's violent crime stays unchanged, I don't really care what weapons being used for it. That's my
Yeah, I
personal
agree
opinion.
to an extent.
Anyway, I have on that link. It stays pretty flat. It drops pretty consistently. 91 to 92 is as far back as I have it going. It drops pretty consistently. Before that, it looks like it's coming down, and then just stays flat. It sort of increases 96 to 97, and then not until 2002 does it actually start going down, and it drops pretty consistently through 2006, 2007, and then just a very slow, steady decline after that. So again, it's hard for me to say. It doesn't look like a specific statistical anomaly with that legislation. Same with UK stuff, and UK is actually worse because theirs goes up for a long time. They had theirs in 1996, and it continues to trend upward in violent crime rates until 2002, and then it starts to come down, and now they're trending back up again.
The statistical, I hear what you're saying about violent crime rate versus just looking at like gun crime. I agree. If the net total of people being affected by violent crime is roughly the same,
It's
I don't
not
know.
being effective, in my opinion.
You're certainly you're just replacing the tool, right?
You know,
just like a gun is a tool, a knife is a tool. You're just replacing one for the other, possibly giving an option to a cheaper tool that maybe is a little bit more difficult to use. But
so that's where if any of these legislation statistics, and I think that's why they always focus on gun crime. It's like, yeah, there's less guns, so there's less gun crime. But if the crime rate stays the same, then what have we done? We have just changed it, and like, yay, success, we won.
Sure.
And now you're not focusing on a problem that still exists and is still affecting people and still hurting people.
Right. The root causes of why people are doing this stuff, obviously, it's not going to be helped by gun control.
Yeah, and then same with mass shootings through the assault weapons ban. The annual number of mass shootings from 1982 to 2012 really remained pretty consistent, all the way through before and after. And 2012, the number of annual mass shootings definitely started to go up.
Yeah,
and I think that there's some societal issues we can look at that have to do with that. Clearly,
there was some societal issues going back to when they first started, right? I think that's the actual root cause is not like just like people are crazy, right?
Yep.
Generally speaking, the root cause is the same thing for all crime and the same thing for basically like what makes your life bad. It's the same root cause.
And I think that's really the thing that often gets missed when people bring up Australia and the UK and all these things is, what have these countries done that the US hasn't done? Not just take guns off the table for a second.
Yeah.
And Australia has had universal health care since like 1975, college free tuition since 1970. The UK has had longer for both.
Right.
It's like almost if you don't make people poor and desperate, they don't kill each other as much.
It's weird. I don't know. Like I always know my dude's in the cubicle next to me. He's always planning his next thing, but like instead of just like doing his job and getting paid a decent salary, it's laughable only because it's like they're like, oh, you need a gun to defend yourself. Well, you wouldn't need a gun to defend yourself if you just like actually treated your population with respect and like general human dignity.
I've always said if we gave everybody, housing, health, and education, security, and just a basic, decent minimum standard of living where nobody was living in
like food as a human right?
Yeah, that kind of thing. You could sell guns out of vending machines and you wouldn't really have a gun problem. And I could say you could ban everything and keep people living in squalor and you're still going to have a major problem. That's kind of my take on it. But I think I think too, it's worth pointing out because the mass shootings get a ton of attention.
They do.
I think it's undue attention.
I would agree. It's like it's a headliner for sure, and obviously, like it's still very terrible.
Yeah, it's
but it's not really all that much more terrible than like any murder on any other day in any other place. Really,
right.
I'm a little bit of a utilitarian when you look at statistics like that. I see people being killed, and I'm like, oh, I get it. Like mass shootings are
They're horrible.
They're horrible.
Horrible. It's
but
not
like,
undermining the.
They're a single-digit percentage of all the murders that happen.
Less than a single digit. They are 0.04%. You are 4 times more likely, over 4 times more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to die in a mass shooting.
Yeah, I totally don't doubt that at all.
So, like, and that's where we get so much focus on this problem that is such a tiny fraction. And then again, we focus on this as a gun problem. When what's the difference between a mass shooting and the Oklahoma City bombing or the Boston Marathon bombing?
I don't think that you would argue that those people who perpetrated that had much of a difference, right? They just decided to do it in a different manner.
And so we should be addressing those things probably as terror attacks because they both are terror attacks, not addressing one as a gun problem and the others as a terror problem.
Well, yeah, you talk about terror attacks, the hypocrisy of calling like
the white people,
not calling them terrorists, right? And when they do mass shootings, but calling everybody else a terrorist,
right?
When they do stuff.
So I think it does an injustice to everybody in those situations when we try to identify, well, a drunk husband who shoots his wife.
Yeah, it's just as
in their trailer house is the same as somebody who walks into a black church and commits a mass shooting. And, but the Muslim guy who blows up the Boston Marathon is that's a different category. Like, no, the mass shooting and the Boston Marathon are the same category.
Definitely.
The husband killing his wife is a horrific crime that requires a very different solution than the other one.
Yeah.
And
similar solutions, but like a different
approach.
Yeah, exactly.
And treating those things the same is a disservice, I think, to everybody.
Well, right. It just doesn't actually impact people if you think about it all the same. If you don't consider that, the 21,000 people that were killed in like 2021 from guns, and 1,000 of them were mass shootings, like less than that. It was
it's hundreds.
Like if you only focus on that, then you're just forgetting about the rest of the 21,000 people. It's like how do you reconcile that? I don't think you can do that in a moral consciously.
And then that addresses our approaches to legislation. So then we go towards Beto coming out with "I'm coming for your AR" type of shit.
God, yeah.
It's from the data I was looking at, 14,000 homicides kind of roughly annually committed a year. It goes obviously up and down by a few thousand. And roughly about 350 of those are committed with any rifle. That's not just assault rifles. That's hunting rifles. That's sporting rifles. That is any rifle. So a fraction of that 350-ish might be assault rifles, right?
Yeah, it's like 5% or like 3%.
So
and like 60% is handguns.
It's all 6,500 roughly of those 14,000 every year are committed with a handgun.
Of course, then there's a whole like 40% that are unreported, which I think is kind of weird.
It is very weird
that you can have like 30 to 40% of gun violence not reporting which weapon.
I think it was that high. I had that one up.
I thought it was pretty large number.
FBI here. So firearms not stated. It's about 2,000 to 3,000 a year. So out of 14,000, what would 3,000 be?
The mathin ain't mathin.
Yeah. Anyway, it is a much higher number than it should be, all things considered. But no, I agree. And then I think that this puts all the focus on, again, 0.04% of total homicides. Puts a lot of focus on the AR stuff.
But I mean, unfortunately, that's human nature to some extent. But that doesn't mean that we should not rein ourselves back in and look at the real issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's also worth pointing out that pretty much the vast majority of violent crime in general, pretty much all mass shootings, homicides, and suicide by gun, which is another thing. We add suicides into gun deaths, which I think is a ridiculous way to look at it. It's suicide by gun, but not necessarily a gun death if we're looking at, because again, the guy who kills his significant other in a domestic abuse with a gun versus a person who ends their life because of depression with a gun is two different issues that we need to look at very differently.
Yeah, I can understand why they consider it a gun death because it's
you used a gun. Your life was ended by a gun.
You did use a gun, and a lot of people will say that is easy to do, right?
And your likelihood of committing suicide goes up statistically. I don't want to say dramatically, but definitely statistically measurably. If you do have access to a gun, there's no question about it. You're far more.
It's the same thing like swimming pools, right? Like you're much more likely to drown if you have a swimming pool in your backyard. You're much more likely to commit suicide with a gun if you have a gun.
But again, addressing that issue, a background check isn't going to address that issue.
No, there's a lot of issues that can't be solved with gun control measures and gun regulation.
And I think more what I'm trying to get at is it's important to differentiate these problems because well over half of gun, like 56% of gun deaths are suicides.
True.
That's something we should be looking at separate from gun. Like I understand they're gun deaths, but we should not be looking at them like you put up the total number of gun deaths and make it sound like that many people are getting murdered by guns every year. And it's like now you're just ignoring all the people who killed themselves. And this is something that is a very real issue that we need to look at very differently from any of the proposed legislation that we're working on with, gun control.
I think there's certainly that's misleading if you only look at that and it doesn't do those people who died that way any justice by any means. But there are things that measurably can affect those people with gun regulation. So like I understand why they put it together in a sense because there are things that need support that could affect the people's ability to get their hands on a gun to commit that act of violence against themselves or other people. So it certainly doesn't address the root cause, but if anything, it just potentially stops that avenue from being an option to people.
Yeah.
So
and like I said, I agree. If you're going to keep guns from people, the biggest impact you're going to have is with suicides.
Yeah. There's no doubt.
It's just again, I can't beat this horse to death enough. We need to look at each type of gun violence qualifier as the world that it lives in. Like again, domestic violence is very different from suicide. It's very different from terror attacks.
Yeah.
And I don't think that gets the attention it deserves.
I 100% agree with you. I also, and I know this isn't you specifically, like I'm going to make a statement here.
No,
and
absolutely.
This isn't about you, but I love how people bring that type of shit up only when guns are being talked about. They never considered the societal impacts and the societal reasoning as to how somebody gets there. They're like, oh, it's a mental health issue. Well, why do you think they have a mental health issue? Yeah. Dumbass. Why do you think these people are committing crimes with these guns? I just want to use I'm angry at these people. They only care about the externalities that bring people to commit gun violence when guns are potentially being taken.
It's a whataboutism. It's never an addressing the issue thing. And I'm frustrated that the pro addressing gun violence, etc. Crowd doesn't leverage that more. Like, all right, you're saying it's a mental health issue. Let's fund mental health. Put up the bills. Put up the bills that say we both agree. Fine. We don't want to tackle gun control. Put up the mental health. Put up the healthcare bills. Put up we have statistics. We don't know that any of this gun stuff.
Yeah,
most of it's
there's
not.
There's only like a light or moderate level of supporting data that any of these measures. Some have some more supportive data, and some have less. But it's only supportive. Like at most, it's definitely not like a for sure thing at best. So there's no particular thing that's like, yep, that will absolutely make a like huge, large dunk.
And I have a 538 article here that is why most gun laws aren't backed up by evidence, and it goes through all of this. But what we do know is backed up by evidence is that if you make people less poor, they don't kill each other as much, they don't commit as much crime. And this is empirically like indisputable. You cannot argue with that logic whatsoever. So again, why aren't the people who, if your true purpose, your true passion is to identify and solve these problems, call the people out on their bluffs. Those whataboutism people, call them out. Say, yeah, absolutely. So let's get universal health care so people don't go bankrupt over this. Let's get affordable housing and safer communities, economic, safety nets, and all of these
Reform
things.
Education funding and shit like that.
Let's put all of this stuff down that will affect these. You do that, we won't touch gun control.
Yeah, I'm totally like, yes. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I that's exactly what I want. And it's so hypocritical that we're not pushing that. I don't know more.
And this is why I wanted to have this conversation, because I feel like it's we need to ban these things, or you can't ban these things, and it's like there's an objective conversation to be had with real solutions that have been proven to work around the world. You can't look at any of these other countries and the gun legislation they passed without looking at what other social programs they have with it and the quality of life of their citizens.
Right.
And if we can meet that and we still have these problems, then great. But until then, the anti-gun control side always wants to, like you said, bring up it's a mental health problem. It's, whatever. Okay, call their bluff. Here's the metrics that will prove that these things will go down if you are really saying that. And then when they vote against it, because they will, because that's the way it goes, you have leverage to use against them. And you're spending, and that's where I get so frustrated is the left so often burns so much political capital fighting for gun control that they're never going to get passed.
Right.
Even if they do get passed, it's probably not going to have the effects.
There's a marginal effects, probably, at best.
And it's going to lose them elections. It's going to lose them the ability to pass other stuff that could actually, like all the time and resources we spend fighting for these things, there's other things we could be doing that would have much
and
more
we can use it as a tool to promote things that people actually want.
Yep.
Universally, people want.
Yep.
Like over 60%, 70% of Americans want. So, yeah, I agree. The Democratic political tool is it's like it's bent and nobody notices, right? Like they're walking down a path that's like going down a cliff, and they're like, yeah, this has got to be the right way.
Yeah, it's absolutely just asinine to me, and that's. But it takes me so long to get to this point because we just had this whole hour and 20 conversation.
True.
To get to that point.
Yeah. And I was kind of already.
You were already there, but if you're coming in from the gun control is the answer aspect, and I'm like, I think there's better options.
It does take a long time to get to this point, and like to point out, like gun control has been racist, absolutely, and there's a lot of hypocritical things that are being said about it, and like the research is not great because it's just it's spotty. It's psychology, and psychology is just very spotty in its own right. So there's a lot going on, and there's really the best way that people agree to fix it is not through gun control. But I don't know. I'm also not in favor of just like completely disregarding that. Like we shouldn't do any of it because it's not the root cause. Like I think there are things that we can do that are short-term fixes. Like I'm perfectly happy rolling back every single gun regulation or gun law when we have things that will help people no longer be in the situations that they are in today that will make them commit gun violence. But I think there can be stopgap measures that can help us reduce at least self-harm in the meantime.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that there's some stopgap measures we could do that would reduce domestics too.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's where a lot of the gun control stuff should be focused on, and we don't. And again, that's my other frustration with gun control is it's so often focused on the black scary guns and mass shootings. It's like, cool, if we banned every assault weapon and had no more mass shootings, our annual homicide rate would remain completely unchanged. Like you would save basically no lives. And that's not a realistic thing. Even if you got rid of assault weapons, you'd still have mass shootings. We had them all through the assault weapons ban. We've had them, they've existed. Columbine happened in the middle of the assault weapons ban, one of the most notable mass shootings, school shootings in history. So like focusing on where it could, because making sure that people who have a history of domestic abuse can't own a firearm, that should be a disqualifier.
Yeah,
Not your weed charge, but your.
So that's why like there's stuff like universal background checks and fully funding those background checks and fully funding organizations. If not, the FBI is not going to do a better job of collating the data that's available to them, because it's either not being given to them and they just haven't asked for it, or like you have like the Navy or the Army, not I think, what was the Air Force? Of a couple like mass shooter was like an Air Force guy who,
and they just never reported any of his mental health issues.
Shit like that. Like fully funding some sort of organization. If it's not going to be the FBI, maybe it's a subgroup, or just fully fund the administration side of the FBI that does that. Like, I don't understand. I know it's like you're fighting against something that's really not going to help. It's like, well, this is something that's already in place.
Yeah.
If we just funded it a little bit better, we could reduce. We already do a decent job, but like there's still like room that could be made that like 80% of Americans agree this is like a no-brainer decision to fund background checks and have them be actual like be successful at doing a background check.
Yeah, I had a statistic in here somewhere, and I'm not finding it at the moment, but I think it was like 90% of crimes that involve a gun were committed with a legally purchased weapon.
Illegally?
Legally. So, they walked into a gun shop, and that probably goes back to that 5% of gun shops that sell to these people.
Right, according to that statistic.
But a lot of these things are things that would have been prevented had current laws and legislation just been enforced the way that they were supposed to be enforced. And I think that you've got a great point of just, for those stopgap measures, we don't need to pass new legislation. We need to hammer out, like, get the current legislation we've got working properly the way it's supposed to work. And then from there, we can see what's being effective.
You have somebody like the Charleston shooter guy who had a psychology or like a mental health like flag that should have came up, but because the background check took longer than 3 days, they were like, okay, well, here's the gun. It's like, well, how about we make it a little bit longer than 3 freaking days? Do you have to have? Like,
and also, why does it take 3 days?
Yeah, exactly. In 2023, when they can do it on average in under 2 minutes.
Yeah.
How could it possibly take over 3 days for that to happen? So like, clearly there's something not working in the machine, right? In a way that it's supposed to. So like, there's one, and all you need is one to be like, yep, that's clearly there's something broken. Like, or somebody's just completely not following the rules. And so like, there's shit like that bugs me. And I'm just gonna run through a couple things here that like, from the science studies that I looked at said that could possibly make a difference. There was moderate to substantial data to show that it could decrease or increase things. So universal background check did a pretty decent, or it was like.
So this is one I want to ask a question on. Because
I'm
universal
around universal a lot, and that means something different than just regular background checks.
So
and the way that it's set up right now,
So what is a universal background check? What would make it different? Because you're already required to get a background check when you purchase through an FFL dealer, a federal firearms license dealer.
Right. I'm not specifically talking about like firearm titles when I've been saying universal, and that's what it means, is to also include firearm titles in any title transaction to be run through a background check. Obviously there's the private seller to seller and the private seller to seller way to purchase a gun that does not require a background check. I don't know why we allow that. You have to transfer a title for a car when it's private to private.
No, you don't. I mean, I buy cars all the time. Nobody has to do a background check on me to sell the car, and I don't have to go to the DMV and transfer that title. I've got lots of vehicles that I've never transferred titles on.
Sure.
Um,
There is some evidence to support that mandating background checks for private to private sale. And I think this is the place where the government should step in and say, hey, we're going to give you this background check tool that you have to use to make a legal gun sale private to private. I don't understand why.
A counterpoint to this one, not a counterpoint, a possible solution to this one that would maybe get less pushback from the gun community
Sure.
and maybe be as, if not more effective,
Cool.
is setting up a system where you want to purchase a gun private party, right?
Yeah.
You go in and you put in your information for a background check, comes with your identification. So you get a printed out piece of paper that is good for, let's say, 10 or 15 days.
Kind of like a permit to purchase, whatever,
Yep.
concealed carry license.
And that has a number on it. And
Sure.
then the person you're selling that firearm to can go in, put that number into their phone or their computer. Yes, this is a legitimate person. This is the date that their permit to purchase type thing expires. They have passed this background check. It's legal to sell a firearm to them. You then hang on to that number as a salesperson. If it ever comes back to you, you can say, this was the number that I was given to do this. That way that reduces some of that, the government's tracking me kind of paranoia shit, because you didn't necessarily purchase or not purchase it from that person. But
Got it. So like if you, well, see, this is where like the firearm title comes into play, because like how do you ever find that person who sold the gun privately to the person who bought it and then maybe did
because
a crime?
At a certain point, somebody bought that gun new.
Right. No, yeah, but like if you
So-
if you get beyond the first person, there's no way to track.
Well,
it
that's
then,
that's why you have this number thing that you keep for your personal record, so this doesn't get logged, but you are encouraged to keep this for your personal records, or you can be held liable for selling a firearm to a person who.
But how
shouldn't
do
have.
they? If you're not the first person to buy it from a dealer, then how do
So
they track it back to you?
The second person who buys it, they come up with their number and their background thing. You record that number as the seller of, I sold this gun to a person with this number.
Yeah.
Just leave it at that. Now,
It doesn't get reported to any.
doesn't get
governmental
reported,
agency.
but you record that, and that's for your own personal protection. Now, that gun's used to commit a crime, 2 or 3 purchases down the road.
Yep.
They come back, and
Hold on, how do they come back? That's what that's what I'm saying. Like physically, so they know what the serial number of the gun is, and they know it's been used for a crime. How?
because they know who the original purchaser was.
So you're saying they go back to the original purchaser and they try to make like a trail all the way.
Well, then you just
from
follow
that-
it down. So, okay, you purchase this gun. This gun is technically registered to you, which is the exact way it happens right now. That first person always has a gun registered to them. If you buy a gun from a
right.
federal license, it's registered to you.
FFL.
Yep. So now you sold that to somebody. You keep this in your records. Otherwise, you're potentially liable for whatever was done with that gun. And we can make that legally, even if you did not keep this. It is your responsibility to keep these records
Indefinitely.
indefinitely. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So, okay, you didn't have it. You sold it to this person. Here's the number. That's a legal transfer. You go to that person until you find the person who ended up with the gun one way or another.
Sure.
And again, I know that sounds ridiculous and over the top for the layman, but
I just don't think. Yeah, it's something. It's something.
You've got to think about the people who are going to have the most fierce opposition to these types of laws, which are the people who like, I don't want the government knowing my business type people, right?
They
And
won't know unless that gun is used for
how to mitigate their opposition to it. Because if you come out with this legislation and then you get a bunch of people riled up and go vote against it, you're not going to get it passed. You're going to spend a ton of political capital getting it done. And that's something that I think is forgotten a lot, when that's the kind of nuance that needs to be considered when we cover these things.
Yeah. All right.
But I agree
like,
with you.
I like the less invasive approach for the type of people like this tend to.
These are the people we're fighting against in this, though, isn't it? Like,
right. No, yeah, I agree. So I can appreciate that method. I think that's reasonable. And I don't think that infringes on anybody's right. Your name is not getting put on an additional
list.
You already bought the gun,
right.
so your name is already somewhere. But like, you're not, you technically, if you're buying it from a private party, your name is not getting put on a list. So that's cool, and that That's fine. One thing that I think is kind of goes back to that like 3-day waiting period, or that 3-day period for the background check.
Yeah.
Is a waiting period, and a waiting period is one of the things that has the most significant statistical backing or data to reduce firearm suicides.
100%. And I think violent crime too.
Yeah, it definitely does affect violent crime as well. I personally, if I'm buying a gun for recreational purposes or for hunting purposes,
A week isn't gonna. Yeah.
a week, 2 weeks, like. Are you not planning out your trip more than 2 weeks ahead of time? You know, are you not preparing yourself to be able to purchase a gun more than 2 weeks ahead of time? No, you have to wait longer to get a passport than it is for you to buy a gun. I think that's a little bit asinine, considering how many people are being killed by guns. So like,
I agree 1,000%. And just so the logic behind that is it stops people from making impulsive decisions, whether that's a decision on depression. You know, if you give somebody who wants to kill themselves a little bit of time to think about it, they're less likely to do it. You know, it gives them more time to seek help. It gives them more time to be like, oh, that was a very emotional episode I was having.
Or hopefully the support you have around you in your community and your family is able to pick up on what's going on in your life.
And the same thing with committing violent acts against others is if you're really angry and you want to hurt somebody right now, well, it's hard to maintain that level of anger for a week or two, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, I
certainly it doesn't stop the people who already have guns by any means, but like in that specific situation, it would stop them.
Yep.
And that's the kind of gun control or the gun regulation that I'm in favor of. Like if there's a specific scenario where like you can run through like the process, be like, like that would stop that person from doing that thing right then and there. Cool. Yep. And then they still have the opportunity. They still have the opportunity to do something terrible. In a couple weeks, but like hopefully they'll have changed their mind, or somebody will have gotten them the help that they so clearly need.
Absolutely. And also that gives them the opportunity to attempt to do something horrible without a weapon and put them on a list that will prevent them in the future from owning
and hopefully not hurt anybody in a way that a gun would hurt somebody.
Right. Yep. So no, I've got no problem with waiting periods. I don't think that there's any issue with waiting periods.
That one has probably the most statistical like data to back it up.
100%.
The other one that had a huge one is child access prevention. And you know, obviously most of the time when a child gets a gun, it's just because it's not
laying around,
not locked up correctly. And in Europe, it's like very, very heavily regulated on how you can store a weapon. And I don't see how storing a weapon in a specific way would be an infringement on your Second Amendment, right? And I think
I think the only opposition to that you're gonna find is people who like, I need this for home defense. How am I supposed to get a weapon out and loaded from this?
Well, make it so it's like fingerprint shit and like design. I'm sure like
there's definitely ways.
There's got to be a way to do it. And it just makes it's like one of the most statistically significant ways to reduce firearm suicides from children and firearm homicides with children. So
and just accidental death, I think.
Right, and accidental death in general. So
no, I agree. If you've got kids in your home, you know, firearm storage should be a top priority and requirement.
Yeah.
I don't know that should apply to everybody, but definitely with kids.
Yeah. I mean, I just think you just need to have some sort of locking mechanism. You can't just have it like they give you a lock when you buy the gun, but like I feel like that's clearly not working, right?
No, because nobody ever puts them back on. I don't know where any of my gun locks are anymore.
It's still in the box with the gun, not attached to the gun. That's in the case or in the. I have one of the fingerprint ones and like a digital code.
Oh yeah.
Like you put your little finger and it just pops up and there you go. It's pretty. It's right. You know. Somewhere in my house.
For sure.
And it's super easy to get to in a situation where I would need to stand my ground.
Yeah.
Which leads me to the next one here. This group found that stand your ground laws significantly increase firearm homicides.
Yep.
I feel like
Castle Doctrine.
Yeah. It's pretty self-explanatory.
Like, I think as long as it's outside of the home, I don't believe in stand your ground laws.
Yeah, I think that's ridiculous.
I think inside the home.
Well, Yeah. I mean, I think if there's some way to get on like video and you can clearly show that it's like self-defense, I conceal and carry is a thing for a reason, right? But
well, stand your ground just means that you have no obligation to retreat from a hostile situation. That's all it means. So like if you're in public and somebody confronts you and you're in a state without castle doctrine, without stand your ground laws, you can stand your ground, and if they continue to come at you, you can shoot them. Where in a state without that, you are required to do everything reasonable without putting yourself in extra harm or like extra risk of harm to remove yourself from that situation. It's basically a de-escalation law. You need to try to de-escalate the situation before you resort to lethal force. And I think that is absolutely, I think stand your ground laws are ridiculous. Now, if you're inside your home and somebody is coming in through the window, absolutely not. All bets are off.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody who would sit there and be like, yeah, like you don't have the right. You have if Israel has the right to defend itself, then so do you in your home.
Oh, geez. That's okay.
Okay, so then one other thing was minimum age requirement. For some reason, for people under 21, it reduces the risk of firearm suicide.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, they have 21
just for purchasing.
Yeah, they have 21 restrictions on handguns and I think on assault rifles now. I don't know.
I'm not 100%. But let me look it up here quick just to get the exact.
I don't know. I struggle with that one because again, if there
was moderate evidence that minimum age requirements for purchasing a firearm decrease firearm suicides among young people, and limited evidence that it's possession of firearm decreases. But yeah, so they found that like for young people specifically, I guess the older you are, the less likely you are to commit suicide with your gun, apparently. Or just more young people commit suicide more than any other demographic group in general. So
no, I agree.
By reducing the amount of young people with guns, you reduce the amount of guns that they use.
Yeah, my struggle with that is if 18 is an adult, then 18 is an adult.
Right, yeah. Old enough to fight, old enough to vote, old enough to shoot a gun in a war.
Yeah. If you can go to war and kill people with a gun at 18 years old, you should be able to have one at home.
Yeah.
I really do struggle with any of the laws that make 21 a requirement for anything. I think that it's, again, another arbitrary number, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're closer to being a more stable adult than you are at 18, at 21. To say that you're like drastically more stable, I don't think you can convince anybody that.
No.
But I think some people will be much more closely than say others. So like I don't really have an issue with that a ton. Specifically, like things that are like substances or things that could potentially affect other people, like voting. You're not gonna kill somebody with drunk driving by voting at 18 versus 21. So that like, clearly you should be able to vote at 18.
Right.
But like your ability to control alcohol and your decisions that are being made and just the decision to consume that much alcohol at 18 is probably vastly different. For Americans at least, I don't know. Apparently, Europe is just fine.
Other countries have,
but
there's also laws dedicated to that specific thing. Like we have drunk driving laws. And
Clearly
again,
there's some societal factors that are in play there.
But if you can be charged with a crime as an adult, like if you could be charged as an adult for homicide with a gun at 18. But you're not allowed to purchase it till 21. Like if the criminal repercussions are the same as an adult, but you're still not allowed to do the same thing. Like it's a technicality that bothers me. I think that if you're going to draw a line in the sand, that's where the line in the sand needs to be. You're an adult or you're not an adult.
Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily have a huge I'm just more. I just know that I personally was not the smartest 18-year-old.
Oh, no, none of us were. I'm a fucking idiot.
Was only marginally smarter at 21 and a little bit more smarter at 25. So, like, I think, obviously, as you age, you're going to be more responsible. So I just don't have a bone to pick with it necessarily.
No, I understand
but
that.
Those were kind of the biggest things that, like, had actual evidence and data backed evidence to show that like there's a potential for those things to have a real effect on people. There's a lot of stuff on here that people want to do because they think it will make a difference, but there's not any significantly statistically significant data that actually backs that up. To your point.
Yep. Well, I think this was good. An hour and 45 minutes in. I wonder how many people stuck this one out.
I suspect people who are only extremely passionate about the subject, which is totally fine.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I've been wanting to talk about this one because I get so frustrated because there's so much nuance. Obviously, to talk about this will be so far our longest episode to date by quite a bit.
Yes.
And obviously this was more my pushing than yours, but I've been, again, very frustrated wanting to talk about the nuances of this because I get so sick of watching us lose elections on the gun control issue when I'm like, it would be one thing if I thought it was going to make a difference, but I'm like, there's real things we can do to solve these problems that would make everybody's life better.
Right. There's actual like very minor gun regulations that wouldn't be so invasive, and we can throw the lack of gun regulation in the faces of people that say will do nothing when they point to things that are not gun regulation to commit gun violence. So we can actually use that to our benefit. We can wield that sword for good instead of bad, or just not pick it up.
Absolutely. And so I hope that we've at least opened some minds and changed a little bit of perspective on the topic, or at least educated people on it.
If you learned one new thing, it's hopefully this almost 2 hours is worth
it. Once again, we appreciate you guys listening to us jabber on about this stuff and letting it get away from us like we did today.
A little bit.
At least it felt like it flowed pretty good. So hopefully,
it always does. So it's tough for me to say at this point.
It's a good point. But we love y'all. We appreciate you sticking with us. We hope that we're finally giving you some good quality podcast content that you're enjoying. And it feels a little bit
better.
Yeah, we're always working on improving. Trying to make it better. So, again, if there's anything, suggestions you guys have, topics you want to hear about, don't hesitate to reach out to us on YouTube or on our TikTok account. Check out our merch on my website, offjowagon.com. Check out our Instagram. And keep tuning in. We'll keep doing this as long as you guys keep listening. We love you guys, and we will see you next week.